Get out. And don't you dare think about taking a single cent of the Sterling name with you. You came here with nothing, Valerie, and you'll leave with even less. Perhaps just the shame of being a failure? Mrs. Sterling spat her voice cold enough to freeze the expensive bourbon in my hand. I looked at her, then at Julian, my husband, who was busy staring at his polished Oxford shoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. Julian, I asked, my voice dangerously low. You're just going to stand there while your mother calls me a failure. After I spent 3 years cleaning up your messes and funding your startups with my inheritance. He finally looked up, but there was no love in his eyes, only a pathetic, calculated greed. Val, let's be real. My mother is right. The money is gone, and so is my patience for your attitude. I felt it then, a searing, white-hot rage that didn't make me scream, but made me go deathly quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I took the glass in my hand and let it slip. It shattered against the marble floor of our Manhattan penthouse, the sound echoing like a gunshot. You want me out? I whispered, stepping over the shards, my eyes locked on the woman who had made the last 3 years a living hell. Fine, but remember this moment, Julian. Remember the sound of that glass breaking, because that's exactly what I'm going to do to your pathetic little empire. I walked out of that apartment with nothing but a small designer suitcase and a heart that had turned into a block of flint. The New York wind bit at my face as I stepped onto Park Avenue, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me that I was still alive. For 3 years, I had played the role of the perfect wife to Julian Sterling. I had dimmed my own light to let his flicker, hoping that my support would turn him into the man I thought he could be. I was wrong. He wasn't a man. He was a parasite, and his mother was the host that kept him toxic. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought that by seizing the joint accounts and manipulating the legal documents while I was grieving my father's death, they had won. What they forgot was who my father was. And they forgot exactly what I was capable of before I traded my ambition for a wedding ring. As I hailed a yellow cab, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A private notification. A secret account they didn't know about, the $75,000 my father had tucked away for emergencies only. Where to, lady? The driver asked, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. I looked at the Sterling Tower disappearing in the distance, a monument to greed and betrayal. I smiled, a sharp, jagged expression that would have terrified Julian if he could see it. Downtown, I said. I have a kingdom to burn down, and I need to start buying the matches. You look like hell, Valerie, Marcus said, sliding a lukewarm cup of black coffee across the scarred wooden desk. I didn't take it. I didn't want comfort. I wanted a weapon. We were in a cramped, windowless office in a building that smelled like old paper and desperation, a far cry from the lavender-scented halls of the Sterling penthouse. Marcus had been my father's most trusted investigator, a man who knew where every body was buried in the financial district. I don't need a status report on my appearance, Marcus, I replied, my voice raspy from the cold. I need to know if the paper trail exists. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his creaky chair. He looked at me with a mix of pity and respect. The Sterlings are meticulous. Mrs. Sterling Evelyn doesn't leave fingerprints on her crimes. She had you sign those investment waivers under the guise of marital trust. Legally, she didn't steal your inheritance. You gifted it to their failing real estate holding. I felt the familiar heat of anger bubbling in my chest. She manipulated me while I was sedated after my father's funeral. That's not a gift, it's a heist. In the eyes of the New York State Court, it's a signature on a dotted line. Marcus countered. But he paused, pulling a thin manila folder from his drawer. They forgot one thing. They think you're a housewife. They forgot you were a senior analyst at Blackwood before you met Julian. I opened the folder. Inside were photos of a warehouse in New Jersey, a massive 150,000 square foot facility that Julian had claimed was being used for high-end furniture storage. Julian told me that warehouse was the cornerstone of their new eco-living line, I said, scanning the documents. It's empty, Valerie. Or rather, it's a shell. Marcus leaned forward. They've been overvaluing that property by $12 million to secure loans from the city. It's bank fraud on a massive scale. But they need a scapegoat in case the auditors come knocking. Guess whose name is listed as the managing director of that specific subsidiary? The air left my lungs. Me. They put it in my name. Exactly. If that building goes under, or if the feds show up, you're the one who goes to prison. Julian and Evelyn walk away clean with the loan money. I stared at the photos. The sheer audacity of their betrayal was breathtaking. They hadn't just taken my money. They had set a timer on my life, waiting for the moment they could blow it up and watch me burn from a safe distance. How long do I have? I asked. The quarterly audit is in 6 weeks. If you don't find a way to shift that liability or expose the fraud before then, you're looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. I stood up the chair, screeching against the floor. I wasn't scared. For the first time in 3 years, I felt focused. The anger had crystallized into a diamond-hard intent. I'm not going to prison, Marcus, but the Sterlings are. What's the plan? You have $75,000. That's a lot for a normal person, but against the Sterlings' legal team, it's a pocket change. I don't need to outspend them, I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out my laptop. I just need to outsmart them. Evelyn thinks I'm a broken bird. Julian thinks I'm a nuisance. I'm going to let them keep thinking that. I spent the next 6 hours in that dark office drafting a blueprint for their destruction. I knew Julian's habits, his Tuesday night poker games at the underground club on 14th Street, his $4,000 a month habit of buying vintage watches to impress people who hated him, and his desperate need for his mother's approval. And I knew Evelyn's weakness, her pride. She cared more about the Sterling reputation than her own son's soul. I need you to track a girl named Chloe, I told Marcus as I prepared to leave. The one Julian's been seeing behind your back. No. I smiled coldly. The one he's been seeing behind Evelyn's back. The one he's been funneling company expenses to. If I can't break their bank account yet, I'll start by breaking their alliance. I walked out into the Manhattan night. The city was a sea of lights, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. I was a predator now. I checked my phone. A text from Julian. Hope you're enjoying the cold. Don't bother calling. The locks are already changed. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my banking app and transferred $20,000 to an offshore digital wallet. Step 1, untraceable leverage. I found a cheap motel in Queens, a place where no one would look for a woman who used to wear $2,000 heels. The room smelled of bleach and old cigarettes, but the bed was firm. As I lay there, watching the neon sign outside flicker against the ceiling, I began to rehearse my first move. The Sterlings thought they had played their final hand. They had no idea I was just dealing the cards. The following morning, New York felt like a different city. The glitz of the Upper East Side was a memory. I was now a shadow moving through the gray industrial corners of Queens. I spent 3 hours at a local library using their public computers to avoid any digital footprints Julian's tech team might track. My target was Chloe Vance. In the Sterling world, Chloe was a marketing consultant. In reality, she was Julian's expensive secret, a 24-year-old aspiring actress with a taste for Hermes bags and penthouse views. Julian thought he was being clever, hiding her in a luxury condo in Long Island City, paid for through the operating expenses of the very warehouse that was supposed to be my downfall. I waited for her outside a high-end Pilates studio. When she emerged glowing with that effortless radiance that only comes from someone who has never had to worry about a utility bill, I stepped into her path. Chloe Vance, I asked, my voice as sharp as a razor. She stopped adjusting her yoga mat. Do I know you? I'm Valerie Sterling, Julian's wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife if we're being technical. She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a look of bored condescension. Oh, the problem Julian mentioned. Look, honey, if you're here to beg me to leave him, you're wasting your breath. He's bored of you. It happens. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I kept my face a mask of indifference. I'm not here to beg Chloe. I'm here to offer you a life raft. Because the ship you're on, the CSS Julian, is about to hit a very large, very legal iceberg. She laughed a high, tinkling sound. Julian is a sterling. They don't sink. Julian is a thief, I countered, stepping closer so our faces were inches apart. He's been paying for your $8,000 a month rent using fraudulent city loans. Loans that are currently under investigation by the state comptroller. When they come for him, and they will, they're going to look at every penny he spent. That means your condo, your bags, and your bank accounts will be seized as part of a criminal conspiracy. The color drained from her face just a little. You're lying. Am I? I pulled out a printed copy of a ledger Marcus had found. Here is the wire transfer from the Jersey Warehouse Initiative directly to your landlord. That's embezzlement, Chloe. And since you've been accepting those benefits, you're an accomplice. I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. People like Chloe don't have loyalty. They have interests. What do you want? She whispered, her bravado evaporating. I want the special project folder Julian keeps on his private cloud, the one he thinks I don't know about. It contains the real logs for the New Jersey site, the ones that show his mother, Evelyn, was the one who authorized the overvaluation. He'll kill me if I touch his laptop, she stammered. He won't have time, I said, leaning in. But his mother will certainly destroy you if she finds out Julian has been using her laundered money to keep a mistress. Evelyn Sterling hates three things: scandal, losing money, and women who think they can outsmart her. If she finds out Julian is draining the family fund for you, she'll make sure you never work in this town, or any town again. I handed her a burner phone. You have 48 hours to send those files to the encrypted numbers saved in the contacts. Do it, and I'll make sure your name stays out of the federal indictment. Don't, and you can practice your acting skills in a jumpsuit. I left her standing there, trembling in her designer leggings. As I walked away, my own phone rang. It was Julian. I decided to answer this time. Valerie, he said, his tone mocking. I hope you're enjoying whatever gutter you've crawled into. My lawyer sent the final papers to your friend Marcus. Sign them or I'll sue you for every breath you take. I was just thinking about you, Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. I was thinking about how much you hate being poor, how much you fear your mother's disappointment. What are you talking about? Just a thought. Oh, and Julian, check your operating expenses for the New Jersey project. You might find a few leaks. Talk soon. I hung up before he could respond. I knew what would happen next. Julian would panic. He would go to the warehouse or his private office to check his tracks. He would be sloppy because he was scared. And when a sterling gets scared, they start making mistakes that even 1,000 an hour lawyers can't fix. I spent the rest of the day in a laundromat watching my only 2 sets of clothes spin in the dryer. I looked like a nobody. I felt like a ghost. But as the sun set over the jagged New York skyline, I knew I was the most dangerous person in the city. The Sterlings had taken my life, my money, and my dignity. Now I was going to take their freedom, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The bait was set. Now I had to wait for the rats to scramble. I spent the next 2 days in a tiny, cramped corner of a 24-hour diner in Long Island City, just a few blocks away from Chloe's luxury tower. I lived on bitter coffee and the adrenaline of revenge. Every time the diner's door creaked open, my hand instinctively went to the burner phone in my pocket. On the second night at 3:14 a.m., the phone vibrated. A series of encrypted pings flooded the screen. Subject warehouse underscore true underscore logs underscore 2024.zip. Subject sterling underscore personal underscore ledger underscore private.pdf. Chloe had delivered. Whether it was out of fear of prison or fear of Evelyn Sterling, she had chosen her own skin over Julian's. I opened the first file. My breath hitched. It was worse and better than I had imagined. The logs didn't just show overvaluation. They showed that the Jersey warehouse was being used to wash bad debts from Evelyn's overseas ventures. Julian wasn't just a scapegoat. He was the bagman. And he had been clumsy. He had documented everything probably as insurance against his own mother in case she ever tried to cut him off. Like mother, like son, I whispered to the empty diner. No trust even among thieves. But then my blood ran cold. I scrolled down to the last page of the ledger. There was a signature under a special authorization clause dated 2 months ago. Valerie Sterling. It was a forgery, but a damn good one. They had used my digital signature from a medical consent form I'd signed while I was in the hospital after my father's heart attack. They hadn't just set me up to take the fall for a failed business. They had set me up to be the mastermind of a multi-million-dollar fraud. My rage, which had been a simmering heat, turned into a focused, icy blade. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me buried in a cell for 20 years so I could never claim a dime of what they had stolen. I didn't waste another minute. I called Marcus. I have it, I said the moment he picked up. But they've forged my name on the authorization files. If I go to the police now, I'm walking right into their trap. Then don't go to the police. Marcus's voice was gravelly with sleep. Go to the one person Evelyn Sterling fears more than the law. Who? Genevieve LeClaire, Marcus replied. The head of the audit committee for the bank the Sterlings are defrauding. She's old-school Manhattan royalty, and she hates Evelyn. Apparently, Evelyn snubbed her at a charity gala 10 years ago, and Genevieve has been looking for a reason to ruin her ever since. An enemy of my enemy, I murmured. Exactly. But Valerie, be careful. LeClaire isn't a saint. She'll use you just as quickly as the Sterlings did if it suits her. I'm done being used, Marcus. From now on, I'm the one holding the leash. I spent the morning transforming myself. I couldn't walk into Genevieve LeClaire's office looking like a runaway wife from a Queen's motel. I spent $1,500 of my remaining cash at a high-end consignment shop in Soho, buying a vintage Chanel suit and a pair of pumps that felt like armor. I did my makeup in a Starbucks bathroom, carving out my cheekbones and painting my lips a shade of red that looked like dried blood. I arrived at the LeClaire Holdings building at noon. I didn't have an appointment. Tell Mrs. LeClaire that Valerie Sterling is here with a gift regarding the New Jersey warehouse project, I told the frosty receptionist. Tell her if she doesn't see me in 5 minutes, the gift goes to the district attorney instead, and she loses her chance to see Evelyn Sterling in handcuffs. 3 minutes later, I was ushered into a top-floor office that overlooked Central Park. Genevieve LeClaire was 70, with hair like spun silver and eyes like cold sapphires. She didn't offer me a seat. You have a lot of nerve, girl, she said, tapping a gold pen against her desk. Your husband's family is about to become radioactive. Why should I talk to you? Because, I said, stepping forward and laying a flash drive on her desk. Julian and Evelyn have stolen $50 million from your bank's credit line using forged documents and empty warehouses. And because I'm the only one who can prove that they forged my signature to do it. I looked her straight in the eye, refusing to blink. You want to humiliate Evelyn? I can give you the evidence to strip her of every asset, every title, and every bit of social standing she has. But I want something in return. Genevieve leaned back, a small, predatory smile tugging at her lips. And what does a broken Sterling wife want? I want total immunity, I said. And I want the $15 million they stole from my father's estate returned to me plus interest. You help me bridge the gap with the DA, and I'll give you the pleasure of pulling the trigger on Evelyn's reputation." The silence in the room was heavy. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then Genevieve picked up the flash drive. "Evelyn always said you were a mouse, Valerie. It seems she's a very poor judge of character." "She made a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "She forgot that even a mouse will bite when you try to drown it." "Sit down, Valerie." Genevieve gestured to the velvet chair. "Let's discuss how we're going to burn that penthouse to the ground." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert. "Breaking Sterling Real Estate Holdings announces emergency board meeting. Rumors of financial irregularities surface." Julian was panicking, the cracks were forming, and I was about to turn them into a canyon. The board meeting was a trap, and Julian was walking right into it with his eyes wide shut. Genevieve Leclerc's office had become my war room. For the next 3 days, we worked with a team of forensic accountants who moved with the silence of assassins. They stayed up all night tracing the $50 million as it bounced from Jersey to the Caymans and finally into a private account Evelyn Sterling used to fund her charitable foundations. "She's been using the bank's money to pay off the debts of her failed art galleries," Genevieve noted, sipping a tea that looked as cold as her smile. "It's not just fraud, Valerie. It's pathetic. She's been stealing from her own future to maintain the illusion of a glamorous past." "That's Evelyn," I replied, staring at the digital maps of their accounts. "She doesn't care if the house is burning as long as the neighbors think the smoke is just a fancy new fog machine." "The board meeting is tomorrow night," Genevieve said. "Julian thinks he's going there to ask for an extension on the loan. He has no idea the board has already been briefed by my legal team." "I want to be there," I said. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. "It'll be a bloodbath, Valerie. Why put yourself through that?" "Because I want to see the look on Julian's face when he realizes the mouse he kicked out of his house is the one who took his throne." The meeting was held at the Sterling Plaza, a glass and steel monolith that felt like a tomb. I arrived late purposefully. I waited until I knew Julian had finished his opening lies, his desperate explanation of why the eco-living warehouse was temporarily underperforming. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. The room went silent. Julian stood at the head of the table looking thinner than he had a week ago. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. Evelyn sat to his right, her posture perfect, her pearls gleaming like shark teeth. "Valerie." Julian stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "What the hell are you doing here? Guard security." "Sit down, Julian," I said, my voice projecting a calm authority that stopped the security guard at the door. I walked to the foot of the table, my heels clicking like a countdown. "I'm here as a primary shareholder of the Sterling Legacy Fund. Did you forget my father's estate was never fully absorbed? It was invested. And as of 2 hours ago, Genevieve Leclerc has helped me reclaim my voting rights." Evelyn's eyes narrowed into slits. "You have no standing here, you little thief. You signed away your rights. We have the documents." "You mean the documents you forged while I was grieving?" I pulled a thick stack of papers from my bag and slammed them onto the table. "I have the original digital timestamps. I have the testimony from Chloe Vance regarding where Julian was the night those signatures were witnessed. And more importantly, I have the real audit of the New Jersey warehouse." The board members, men and women who had known my father, began to murmur. They started looking at the files I had distributed. "This is a lie!" Julian screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "She's a disgruntled ex-wife. She's trying to extort us." "Extort you?" I laughed, and the sound was cold and sharp. "Julian, I don't need to extort you. You've already ruined yourself. Look at page 12. As the board members turned the pages, Evelyn's composure finally cracked. She saw the records of her private foundations. She saw the link between the bank's $50 million loan and her personal art collection. "Julian!" Evelyn hissed, her voice low and terrifying. "What did you let her find?" Mother, I didn't." Julian was shaking. He looked like a small child caught in a lie. "He didn't find anything, Evelyn," I intervened. He was too busy buying $40,000 watches for his mistress with the company's credit line. He was so distracted that he forgot to delete the special project logs from his cloud. He made it very easy for me. One of the senior board members, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had been my father's oldest friend, stood up. He looked at Evelyn with pure disgust. "Evelyn, if these documents are accurate and they look incredibly thorough, this isn't just a board matter. This is a criminal matter. We are calling an emergency vote to remove you and Julian from all positions effective immediately." "You can't do that!" Evelyn shrieked, her mask of royalty finally shattering. "I am this company!" "No," I said, stepping closer to her, my face inches from hers. "You're just a woman who stole from the wrong person. Julian told me I came here with nothing and would leave with even less. He was wrong. I'm leaving with everything. And you're leaving with a handcuffed escort." I turned to Julian, who was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. "I told you to remember the sound of that glass breaking, Julian," I whispered. "That wasn't just a drink. That was your life." Outside, the sirens were already wailing. Genevieve had made the call to the district attorney's office 20 minutes ago. As the doors opened and the investigators and windbreakers walked in, I didn't feel the joy I expected. I felt a strange, cold peace. The debt was being paid. But as I watched the officers approach Julian, I saw him glance at his mother. Even now, he was looking for her to save him. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Sterling had no answer. The fallout was swifter than a summer storm, but far more devastating. Within 48 hours of the board meeting, the Sterling name, once a gold-plated passport to the highest circles of Manhattan, had become a brand of toxic waste. I watched from the safety of a high-end hotel suite, a courtesy of Genevieve Leclerc, as the news cycle tore my former life to shreds. The New York Post ran a headline that simply read, "Sterling Silver turns to rust." Below it was a grainy photo of Julian being led out of the plaza, his jacket pulled over his head to hide from the paparazzi's flashes. Evelyn followed, her chin still high, though her eyes were vacant, fixed on a world that no longer belonged to her. "They've set the bail at $2,500,000 for Evelyn and $1 million for Julian," Marcus told me over the phone. I could hear him shuffling through more documents, the sound of a man who finally smelled victory. "But here's the kicker. The court froze their personal assets. They can't even afford a public defender, let alone a high-priced shark. The banks are calling in every favor, every cent." "What about the penthouse?" I asked, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of Midtown. "What about the throne room, where they decided I was nothing?" "It's being seized by the bank tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Marcus replied. "Everything in it, the art, the furniture, the $15,000 Persian rugs, it's all part of the liquidation to pay back the creditors. They are being evicted, Valerie, for real." I felt a cold shiver of satisfaction. "I want to be there when the locks are changed, Marcus. I want to see the dust settle." The next morning, the Sterling penthouse was stripped of its life. Moving men in gray jumpsuits were hauling out crates of Julian's vintage watches and Evelyn's beloved Impressionist paintings. The air, which used to smell of expensive lilies and arrogance, now smelled of cardboard and defeat. I stood in the center of the living room, the same spot where Julian had shattered a glass, and told me I would leave with nothing. Now the floors were bare, and it was he who was empty. A shadow appeared in the doorway of the master bedroom. It was Julian. He had been allowed back for 1 hour under police supervision to collect essential personal items. He looked like a ghost, unshaven, his skin sallow, wearing a wrinkled shirt that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but looked like a rag on him. "You really did it, didn't you?" he rasped, his voice cracking. "You burned it all down. You destroyed your own family." "I didn't burn it, Julian," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I just stopped putting out the fires you and your mother started." You lit the match the day you thought you could steal my father's legacy and treat me like a disposable asset. I just opened the windows so the world could see the smoke. He stepped toward me, but the officer at the door cleared his throat, and Julian stopped. We were a team, Valerie. We could have had everything. Why couldn't you just stay in your place? Why did you have to be so vengeful? Because my place was wherever you needed a victim. I spat the rage I had suppressed for years, finally boiling over. You didn't want a wife. You wanted a silent financier. You stole $15 million from my father's estate while the soil on his grave was still fresh. You used my signature to hide your crimes. Did you think I would just vanish? I loved you, he whispered, a desperate hollow lie. You loved the status I gave you. You loved the way I fixed your messes. But the fixer is gone, Julian. From now on, you get to live with every choice you made. You can tell your cellmate how much you loved me. I walked over to the mantel where a small framed photo of our wedding day still sat, the only thing the movers hadn't touched. We looked so happy. I looked so naive. I picked it up, pulled the photo out, and tore it into 4 neat pieces. I let the scraps fall onto the dusty floor like snow. The bank is taking the keys in 10 minutes, I said. I suggest you hurry. I hear the shelters in Queens are quite authentic this time of year. As I walked toward the elevator, I saw Evelyn Sterling sitting on a lone packing crate in the hallway. She didn't look up. Her hands, usually adorned with diamonds, were bare and shaking. She was no longer the queen of Park Avenue. She was just a tired, broken woman whose greed had finally consumed her. When I reached the lobby, the cold New York air hit me, but it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a fresh start. My phone buzzed. A message from my legal team. Initial recovery of $12,500,000 successful. Funds secured. The empire was in ashes, and from those ashes I was finally rising. The silence of my new life was expensive. I had relocated to a high-security loft in Tribeca, far from the prying eyes of the tabloids that were still feasting on the Sterling corpse. My days were filled with meetings with Genevieve's lawyers, and my nights were spent staring at the ceiling, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew Evelyn Sterling too well. A woman like that doesn't go into the dark without trying to drag someone down with her. The call came at 2:14 a.m. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Genevieve. It was a restricted number. I hope you're enjoying my bed, Valerie, the voice hissed. It was Evelyn. She sounded frantic, the usual polished veneer replaced by a jagged raw edge. I'm in my own bed, Evelyn. One I bought with my own recovered money, I replied, sitting up and clicking on the lamp. How are you enjoying the holding cell? I hear the fluorescent lighting is terrible for the complexion. Does it match your orange jumpsuit? You think you've won? She laughed, a sound like glass grinding on stone. You think you can just walk away with the Sterling legacy? Julian is a fool, yes. He was sloppy. But I have been playing this game since before your father even made his first million. I have files, Valerie. Files that prove your father wasn't the saint you think he was. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady. My father was a good man. You're grasping at straws, Evelyn. It's over. The board has turned, the banks have fled, and even your dog would probably bite you right now. Is it? Ask yourself why he really went into business with us. Ask yourself about the $5 million contribution he made to a certain offshore account in 2018. If I go down for fraud, I'm taking his memory with me. I'll make sure every headline in this city paints him as my accomplice. You'll have your money, but you'll have a name that smells worse than mine. Is your pride worth his posthumous disgrace? She hung up before I could retort. I sat in the dark, the cold seep of doubt creeping into my bones. The thought of my father's reputation being dragged through the mud by a cornered viper like Evelyn made my stomach churn. I called Marcus immediately. I need you to dig into my father's 2018 records, specifically any transfers around $5 million. Evelyn claims he was involved in their schemes. 3 hours later, I was in Marcus's office. He looked exhausted, his desk covered in digital printouts and coffee stains. "She wasn't lying about the transfer," Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. "There was a $5 million wire to a Bahamian account linked to the Sterlings, but she lied about what it was for. Your father discovered what they were doing back then. He tried to buy his way out of the partnership to protect you. He wasn't their accomplice. He was their first victim. He paid them to keep your name out of their dirty books." I felt a sob catch in my throat. He had been trying to save me even then. He had paid them a fortune to ensure I would never be tainted by their filth. And here's the best part. Marcus smiled grimly. Because that money was transferred under duress and Evelyn never declared it. It's not just fraud. It's extortion. And because it crossed state lines, it triggers a federal racketeering charge. She just gave us the silver bullet, Valerie. I stood up, the doubt vanishing, replaced by a cold surgical precision. She thought she was threatening me. She was actually just confessing to a RICO violation. I arrived at the detention center as the sun was rising. When Evelyn was brought into the visiting room, she looked smug. "Have you considered my offer?" she asked. "I have," I said, leaning in close to the glass. I looked into the $5 million. I found the duress filings, Evelyn. I found the emails my father sent to his attorney documenting your threats. You didn't find a partner in crime. You found a way to guarantee yourself life in prison. The FBI is reviewing the files now. You wanted to talk about my father's legacy, fine. His legacy is the evidence that's going to bury you." The smugness evaporated. Her face turned the color of ash. I walked out into the crisp morning air, finally free. The vipers were caged. With Evelyn's desperate blackmail attempt backfiring, the legal walls were closing in faster than a tomb. But while the matriarch was rotting in a cell, Julian was out on a reduced bail, tucked away in a cheap apartment in Jersey City, a far cry from the $20 million penthouse he used to call home. Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "Valerie, Julian is reaching out. Not to me, not to the lawyers. He's trying to get to Chloe. He's desperate, and when Julian is desperate, he gets dangerous not to others, but to himself. He's looking for a way to flee." "Let him try," I said, looking at the city skyline from my new office. "He doesn't have a passport. It was seized. He doesn't need a passport to disappear into the underbelly of Jersey. But that's not why I'm calling. He has something even Chloe didn't find. He's offering a trade, the location of the $8 million in physical gold his mother stashed away for an emergency exit, in exchange for you dropping the civil suit against him personally." I laughed a cold, dry sound. He wants to buy his freedom with his mother's stolen gold. How poetic. He wants to meet, tonight, at the old warehouse in New Jersey, the one that started this whole mess. He says he'll only show the location to you. "It's a trap, Valerie," Marcus warned. "Don't go." "Of course it's a trap," I said, standing up and grabbing my trench coat. "But Julian is a predictable predator. He thinks he can manipulate me one last time. He forgets that I know exactly how his mind works." I didn't go alone. I had Marcus and 2 plainclothes security guards trailing me in a separate car. The warehouse was a hulking shadow against the Newark skyline, a monument to the Sterling's greed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and rust. Julian was waiting in the center of the vast, empty floor, illuminated by a single flickering work light. He looked pathetic. He was wearing a dirty hoodie and his eyes were bloodshot. "You came," he said, his voice echoing. I came to see if you'd actually sunk this low, Julian, I said, staying 10 feet away. Selling out your mother's secret stash, that's cold even for you. She's gone, Valerie. She's never coming out, he screamed, his voice cracking. Why should I go down with her? She used me just as much as she used you. That gold, it's buried under the floorboards of her summer cottage in the Hamptons. $8 million. It's yours. All of it. Just tell the DA. I was a witness, not a participant. Tell them I was under her thumb. I stepped closer, the light catching the hard lines of my face. You weren't under her thumb, Julian. You were her willing apprentice. You enjoyed every second of the power. You enjoyed looking down on me. You enjoyed the operating expenses you used for your mistresses. I can give you the gold, he pleaded, reaching out a hand. I don't want the gold, Julian. I have my father's legacy back. I have my dignity. What I want is justice. I pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing. Did you get all of that, Marcus? Julian froze. From the shadows, Marcus and the officers stepped out, their footsteps heavy on the concrete. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, bribery, and witness tampering, Marcus said, clicking his tongue. You really can't help yourself, can you, Julian? Julian collapsed to his knees, his face buried in his hands. He started to sob, not the sob of a man who was sorry for what he had done, but the sob of a man who realized he had finally run out of lies. You were right about one thing, Julian, I said, looking down at him with nothing but pity. I did come here with nothing, but I'm leaving with the one thing you'll never have. What's that? He whimpered. A clean conscience. As they led him away in handcuffs, I looked around the empty warehouse one last time. This place was supposed to be my prison, the site of the fraud that would end my life. Instead, it was the place where the last sterling finally broke. I walked out into the night, the cool wind of the Atlantic blowing off the water. The debt wasn't just paid, it was erased. The trial of the century didn't happen in a grand courtroom with mahogany panels. It happened in the cold, sterile hallways of the New York State Supreme Court. The sterling name was dragged through months of depositions, financial audits, and witness testimonies. But for me, the climax wasn't the legal jargon. It was the confrontation that happened in the small, windowless witness room on the morning of my final testimony. I was straightening my blazer when the door opened. I expected Marcus. Instead, I saw a court-appointed guard leading a woman into the room. It was Evelyn. She was dressed in a standard-issue gray jumpsuit, her hair unkempt, the Queen of Park Avenue, reduced to a number on a badge. 5 minutes, the guard said, stepping outside. Evelyn didn't sit. She stood by the door, her eyes burning with a hollow, feverish intensity. You look smug, Valerie, sitting on your pile of recovered millions while my son rots in a cell. Julian is in a cell because he tried to bribe a federal witness with stolen gold, Evelyn. I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. He learned from the best. He learned that everything has a price. He just forgot that I'm the one who stopped selling. You destroyed a legacy, she hissed, stepping closer. That company was built on 3 generations of sterling blood. It belonged to Julian. It belonged to the future. It was built on 3 generations of theft, I countered. And as for the future, your future is a $120,000 legal bill you can't pay and a life sentence for racketeering. The sterling name is no longer a legacy. It's a cautionary tale. She lunged toward me, but stopped herself, her breath coming in ragged gasps. You think you're different. You used Genevieve LeClaire. You used Marcus. You used that little slut, Chloe. You're just like me, Valerie. You're a predator who found a better disguise. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt no anger, only a profound, chilling clarity. The difference is, I didn't start the hunt. I just finished it. I used the tools you gave me. You taught me that in New York, you're either the one at the table or the one on the menu. Thank you for the lesson, Evelyn. It's the only valuable thing I ever got from you. The guard knocked on the door. Time's up. As she was led away, I walked into the courtroom. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the hushed whispers of the press. I took the stand, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at Julian, who sat at the defense table. He looked like a hollowed-out shell, his eyes darting toward the exit. For the next 4 hours, I laid out the truth. I spoke about the $15 million embezzled from my father's trust. I detailed the forged signatures the shell companies and the systematic psychological abuse they had used to keep me silent. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I spoke with the clinical precision of the analyst I had always been. The defense tried to paint me as a vengeful ex-wife. They brought up my secret bank accounts and my alliance with Genevieve. Mrs. Sterling, the defense attorney barked, isn't it true you orchestrated this entire downfall out of spite because your husband was having an affair? No, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. I orchestrated this because my husband and his mother committed multiple felonies. The affair was just a symptom of their lack of character. The fraud, however, was a crime against my family's legacy. I'm not here for spite. I'm here for the $50 million they stole from the people of this city. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Even Julian couldn't look at me. As I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, Marcus was waiting by the steps. The jury is deliberating, but the buzz is clear. They're going to throw the book at them. It doesn't matter what the jury does anymore, Marcus, I said, looking up at the gray New York sky. I've already delivered my own verdict. My phone buzzed. A news alert: Sterling assets liquidated, proceeds to be distributed to victims. I stood on the sidewalk, a woman who had been discarded, betrayed, and left for dead. I was no longer a Sterling. I was Valerie, and for the first time in my life that was more than enough. The final hammer fell on a Tuesday. The judge didn't mince words, sentencing Evelyn Sterling to 25 years without the possibility of parole and Julian to 12. As the bailiffs led them away, the heavy clinking of their chains was the final note in a symphony of ruin that had begun with a shattered glass in a Manhattan penthouse. I stood on the steps of the courthouse watching the media trucks pack up their gear. The Sterling scandal was yesterday's news. Manhattan was already looking for its next victim, but I was no longer on the menu. It's done, Valerie, Genevieve LeClaire said, stepping out of her black town car to join me. She looked at me with a rare glimmer of genuine respect. The final transfer hit your trust an hour ago. $22,500,000, including the interest and the liquidated assets from their Hamptons estate. You're officially the wealthiest failure in the history of this city. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of greed. It was the smile of a woman who had finally closed a book that had been bleeding for too long. It was never about the money, Genevieve. It was about the cost of the lie. And what will you do now, with $22 million and a reputation for being the most dangerous analyst on Wall Street? I'm leaving, I said, looking toward the horizon. I'm going to build something that doesn't require a husband's name or a mother-in-law's permission. I'm starting a foundation for victims of financial abuse. No one should have to walk through this fire alone. I spent my final afternoon in New York at my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, the wind whistling through the ancient oaks. I placed a single white lily on the stone and sat on the grass. I got it back, Dad, I whispered. Everything they took, every cent, every shred of honor. Your name is clear. And mine is finally my own. I felt a strange, warm peace settle over me. The anger that had fueled me for months had evaporated, replaced by a steady, quiet strength. I wasn't just a survivor. I was an architect of my own fate. That evening, I sat in the airport lounge waiting for my flight to London. I had a small suitcase, a laptop, and a one-way ticket. As I waited, I pulled out a burner phone, the one I had used to coordinate with Chloe and Marcus. I looked at the call logs, the messages of desperation, and the files of betrayal. I walked over to a trash bin and dropped the phone inside. Then I took my wedding ring, the $80,000 diamond that had once felt like a shackle, and placed it on the counter of a charity donation box for a local orphanage. "Valerie Sterling," the gate agent called. "Just Valerie." I corrected her with a sharp, confident smile. As the plane climbed over the Atlantic, the lights of New York City began to shrink into a grid of shimmering diamonds. I looked down at the city that had tried to break me, and I felt nothing but gratitude. It had taught me that loyalty is a choice. Power is a mask, and the only person who can truly define your worth is the one looking back at you in the mirror. I closed my eyes and leaned back. The sky was dark, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of the shadows. I was the one who controlled the light. The hunt was over. My life was just beginning. Valerie's story is a tough one, but it hits home. It's a reminder that no matter how much you love someone, you should never lose yourself in the process. Don't let loyalty turn into a trap. People might try to break you or steal your spark, but they only win if you let them define your worth. Stay sharp, trust your gut, and always keep your own back. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's standing on your own 2 feet and living a life that's entirely yours. Thanks for sticking around to hear Valerie's journey. I hope her story gave you a little boost or a new perspective on standing up for yourself. If you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Valerie's revenge. And don't forget to follow so you don't miss out on the next stories. See you in the next one.